This is Changeling the Podcast.
Welcome to Changeling the Podcast. Come for the glamour, stay for the vibes. I'm your host, Josh, and with us is your other host, Puka. Say hi, Puka.
Bonsoir.
What are we talking about today, Puka?
Books, I guess, and projects. So this is going to be the first of our Changeling 30th anniversary, not edition, 30th anniversary celebration, let's call it, project, where we're putting together and developing a whole bunch of books. And we have special guest Andrew with us to talk about the first two today.
Hello there. Very excited to be back.
Yay, welcome back.
Huzzah! I don't think any of us really have a plan for how we're going to talk about these things today. So
Yep.
we're going to wing it, which is appropriate for really both of the books in a sense.
Yeah.
Depends how you like your wings.
Indeed. So yeah, we're talking about the Changeling Cookbook and Kithbook Swan Maiden, the first of which primarily is Andrew and I co-writing, and the second one is all Andrew. So
Do we want to first talk about more about the C30 project, or is that?
we can.
So what's the C30 project?
I keep talking about it. I keep dropping the name.
Yeah.
So on Mage the Podcast, when they got to 2023, Terry Robinson had expressed this desire to do special things for the 30th anniversary of the game. And that primarily turned into interviews with some of the creators. He got hold of some kind of ancient Mage documents like the fabled Zeroth edition manuscript. There were some projects that were Storytellers Vault oriented, although some of them took a little bit longer. Some of them have still not fully come to fruition. But it was just kind of this initiative on his part, I think, to use the occasion to highlight once again all of the glory that is Mage. And any good idea is worth stealing. So
Stealing Mage the Podcast is like how we got changed on the podcast.
I mean, basically, yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, this year is the 30th anniversary of Changeling's release. August will be the exact month. And for my part, I was like, well, gee, wouldn't it be cool to produce a whole bunch of books, as well as possibly do other things later this season, like maybe an actual play or more interviews or whatever. But the books are really kind of occupying the central part of my brain at this point. So the initial goal was to do one each month in 2025. It is already February, so maybe there will still be a dozen, but they're just going to kind of be released when they're released, I think.
Well, if you can get 2 of them done for February, then that's catch up.
Yeah, perfect. And then maybe 2 at the end of April. We'll go from there. So yeah, that's the nutshell of it. And there's a whole bunch of books on the slate. A whole bunch of people are involved. The experience of it, like just kind of working on it for me at least, has been quite glamorous because it has fulfilled a lot of my creative urges. And it's been cool to kind of flip through pages again and catch things that I didn't catch on my first read through and find new ways to spin them into new material. I don't know if, Andrew, it's been that way for you, but
I mean, it's been a whirlwind of dreams and excitement, and I always end up seeming to have 2 projects on the go at any given time for the vault. So having
only 2.
What's having another 2 going at the set? 4's it's a nice round number, and I keep having the excuse of, well, I'm not writing all of these books. I'm just helping on these. So yeah, I can do more. There's always more to do. The boggin in me can't say no. Kithbook Swan Maiden was a complete accident, but it's not the first Vault book I've accidentally written without meaning to. So
wasn't Kithbook Doulahan also an accidental kind of thing?
No, Doulahan was intentional. It budded off paved with good intentions by accident.
Yes.
So the cookbook, did we want to talk more about?
Well, it's a cookbook. That's the great thing about the Changeling Cookbook is that it's self-explanatory. The title says exactly what it is.
We're cooking changelings?
Okay, maybe not. Maybe I have to explain it a little bit more. Well, really, the seed of the idea was because there was a werewolf cookbook and a mage cookbook, and I don't know. I guess those might have been stretch goals. I don't really remember if they were Kickstarter things, but yeah, it always seemed a little bit weird to me that there wasn't one for Changeling. Like, Changelings like to eat; they're cultural, you know.
It's not like the Vampire Wraith cookbooks, which I don't think are
Right.
want to use.
They'd be short. Although someone at one point talked about doing a vampire cocktails guide. I'm like, yeah, that actually could be kind of fun.
Bloody Caesars.
Yeah, all the bloody drinks. So that was the genesis of it. And then Andrew, you had been working on other food related stuff, if I recall correctly.
I think anytime someone suggests, oh, this would be a neat project, I somewhere in the back of my files have like, oh, I have an outline for that. Or so the moment the suggestion of a Changeling cookbook came up, I not only had an outline, but I think I had an entire source book that is in the top 5 roster of the waiting list of projects to be done. Part of it was I had intended to have recipes in there as well, so it was actually quite a relief to go, yeah, just carve out all the recipes and put them in another book, but maybe keep the frame story. So I was very happy to say, here you go, have this, here's an idea.
Huzzah!
Yeah.
Well, in terms of that frame story too, maybe we should kind of. I think it's actually still kind of. It's like 80% complete about what the frame story will actually be from my side, but I think you've had a firmer idea of what you wanted to do with that in terms of having Blake Burley, etc. So
Yes,
maybe,
and it's very excited to. I'm sure there'll be some people listening who are excited to hear that name. So, to rewind the clock, the outline that was lying in the back of the folders was for a book called Blake Burley's Tome of Culinary Wonders, which was going to be the Changeling Source and Cookbook, or Cook Source Book, something like that. Blake Burley, the titular character, being a Boggin, who was an expert in, or supposed to be an expert in, the magic of fairy food. And the initial idea was that he has wanted to compile a cookbook of Changeling magical recipes to make as his legacy or something along those lines. So I had this frame character, Blake Burley, who I then, a couple of years back, was invited to play an online Discord game, Changeling game, and hadn't played in a long time. I thought, why don't I try playing Blake Burley? And has since become my absolute favorite character I have ever played of all time. So I'm hoping some people listening to this are excited to hear that Burley is finally publishing that cookbook that he kept yammering on about in game. So for the fast forward back to the present day, the C30 Changeling Cookbook just has the frame story of, it starts with Burley has sent out a letter to all his various friends, colleagues, and perhaps frenemies in the Changeling cooking community to share recipes to try and spread the magic of the culinary dream.
which is a strong one, I must say.
I think so.
And I'm reminded of speaking of like frame characters, one that I can't remember. I think I had like intended at some point for her to show up, but Lee from the Immortal Eyes trilogy at the very start of Changeling was a she chef, and she was very much about the glamour of food and cooking and, you know, making ends meet as a short order cook, something like, or maybe she was a sous chef. I don't remember, but like,
Forgotten about her, yeah.
yeah, and I mean it's such a minor part of her story as it is writ large, but yeah, that's always been kind of an aspect.
Did she get an update in the whatever the fourth book they published?
She
never
did.
got around to finishing it. Oh,
Yeah, she did. It's, I'll just leave it at that. It's like,
okay. To read that
anyway.
now. Anyhow. So yeah, I guess we've gone back and forth a great deal about what recipes to assign what kith, because I think every kith could easily have a couple dozen recipes
their own
associated with them.
Yeah, individualized kith cookbooks maybe would have been too much. But I think we have actually hit our complement of 50 recipes, which is, if I dare say, quite impressive. So,
crikey.
And some of them are, I mean, I think one of the things that was most engaging about doing it, because to be clear, almost all of these have been tested in our own kitchens or in the kitchens of friends. And in many cases, photos of varying quality have been taken that will be provided in the book. But, it was kind of an excuse to try out all of these cuisines or all of these items that I at least had never cooked before. And, some of them worked out better than others, but ultimately I think they all kind of turned out edible. Over the holidays, I was just foisting things onto people.
I definitely have some new go-to recipes after some of these ones. And some that I confess I haven't quite gotten around to trying, but now really want to. Looking sideways at the Stargazy pie recipe, which I have yet to actually find the time. I've made enough pies that I feel like I could speak with some authority on the process. And hopefully before the book is published, I will have tested it out. But I haven't actually made that one yet, I confess.
Well, as of this recording, I think there's 3 weeks left in February, so let's...
Oh gosh, okay. Did you have a favorite recipe?
Ooh.
Or standout. You don't have to say favorite.
Standout.
One you want to call out.
Yeah, there's a few standouts. I mean, there's the ones that I think turned out the best, and the ones that I was most keen to try, and the ones that were the most fun to write. So maybe I could pick one of each of those. You go first. Let me scroll through and see.
Oh, okay. I think one that is now going to be a seasonal staple in my house, I think, is for the Gildu, the chestnut soup, which I was very excited to have an excuse to start using some recipes from. I have a whole bookshelf of cookbooks I've collected, and one of them is an antique one from early 1900s, and it's a compilation of a British housewife's magazine for sort of farmers' housewives. And the recipes in there, I mean, it takes a little bit of thinking to realize what they're talking about sometimes.
Right.
It's also... people always tease me about how, the British don't have cuisine. They have, like, fish and chips and that's it. Like, no, they do have it. They just sort of lost it during World War II. Turns out it's all in this book. And things like the chestnut soup, I was very excited to try out and is definitely a new favourite. They also had a recipe on making black pudding and included graphic details on how to collect all the ingredients.
Oh, no.
There was a brief moment of going, this would be very appropriate for the Red Caps, but I don't think I can publish this.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was, I think, the soup, chestnut soup is definitely a new go-to. I have to shout out the American pancakes because that is a family recipe from my mother and then through my sister testing it and then myself. So that is definitely a favorite.
We're going to have to, at some point, figure out the introductory material about food safety. Like, please don't collect your own blood for these recipes.
Thankfully, I don't think we have any recipes in the end that require blood, but...
Yeah. So for me, I think that the ones that I'm going to shout out, the very first one, let me back up a minute. Something that was really gratifying for a few of these was that I found anecdotes or personal connections that I was able to work into the text. So one is the stuffing waffle, which was first cooked for me by Terry Robinson, and it was like a revelation of culinary delight. So that might be my vote for the tastiest one in the entire book that I've contributed. Although I was pretty proud of how the baklava turned out as well. And then the other Bogan one that I wanted to point to is the sweet potato and apple crisp, because that came up from a Thanksgiving dinner many years ago where I attended. And the mix of people there was a configuration of vegan, gluten-free, soy-free, corn-free. And I was like, what in the blazes am I going to make for this meal? Because I wanted to make something everyone could eat at this potluck. And I wanted to make a dessert. So I was like, okay, apples, sweet potatoes, check. Gluten-free oats, check. I used coconut oil instead of butter. I made a maple ginger syrup and soaked the whole thing in it, spices. And it was so delicious, and it's become a go-to in my kitchen, I guess. So those are ones that stood out. I never want to make Turkish delight again, or grape leaves for that matter. So those are two of the Seder recipes, and I was like, I'm never doing these again.
I've been dying to make grape leaves again. I had a couple of years back another flat I was living in. The neighbor, behind that fence at the bottom of the garden, the neighbor had a grapevine, and during lockdown, he said the thing was in full spring foliage, and said, "Yeah, go ahead." And I guess because I had not much to do, it meant that I had a great deal of fun making a great many grape leaves. But
Oh, domades.
Yeah. Those are the only 2 recipes that I had to make twice. They were just so terrible the first time. So, but yeah, I think I just need to get the trick of it. That's really what it comes down to.
I never want to have to ice house blazons ever again.
Oh, they were very impressive, though.
I'm thrilled with how they came out. I'm very proud of them, but I was going absolutely cross-eyed.
Yeah. Also not fun, cleaning and deveining 2 pounds of shrimp to make étouffée.
Oh gosh,
Took a while.
This has been a labor of love. Some of these,
and like the final products have been 90% of the time delicious. So the last one that I want to call out is one of the slewer recipes for lemony cricket shortbread, for which a big Ziploc bag full of roasted crickets from the bodega down the street, ground them up into cricket flour, and incorporated them into lemon shortbread. So it's pretty tasty.
I am very excited to try out that recipe. Eventually, I had the joy of visiting friends down in Mexico over the Christmas break and got to try crickets for the first time, and was very surprised at how much I liked them. They are actually very, very tasty, and now one of my favorite foods. And upon returning to England, discovered where I can get them from, which, much to the dismay of everyone at work, because I'm actually a caterer by day, and I have threatened now repeatedly to start putting bugs on the menu.
Oh no. I think you're keener on them than I am, so
fair enough.
They weren't awful. I did just try one on its own, and I was like, this is not unpleasant, but it took way longer to chew than I wanted it to.
The ones we had I had in Mexico were toasted and tossed with a little bit of lime and chili. And then served on like a little corn cake, and they were no chewing. They were crispy and citrusy and a little bit like shrimp, but earthier. Absolutely loved them.
Yeah.
Which was jarring, looking at your plate and thinking my plate is covered in bugs. But the experience I'm having eating these is very positive.
Well, and shrimp are just bugs of the sea, really. So
yeah, but you have to devein those.
Yes. So maybe structurally we should mention that there are 3 recipes each for the Kithane. Each group of the Kithane and the She are lumped together.
Or the core kits.
The core kits, yeah. So there's 36 for them, and then 14 for various other kiths. Not all of them, just like a scattershot assortment.
Not all kiths get a recipe. Because
right, that would be
a lot of recipes.
Maybe for the 40th anniversary, we'll do the rest of them.
It's like, here's your fuoth stew, and here's...
Right. What does a karamet eat, even? Ashes soaked in myrrh. I don't know. And it was fun kind of trying cuisines from parts of the world that I didn't know well, and trying to... Because, obviously... with the discussion around culture and appropriation and what to include and what not to include, that was something which we talked about at length and tried to figure out how to do. And I think the way we've handled it is probably about the best we could do. I mean, I hope so.
I'd like to think so.
Yeah, like treating those cuisines with respect and approaching them as much on their own terms as we could, and within the frame story, acknowledging like where these recipes are coming from and what these NPCs essentially, what in their voice, how they would interpret them.
And it does seem like if you live in a reasonable metropolitan area, you probably can get the ingredients for whatever these are.
Oh yeah,
regardless of your country, because that could be a big problem when you're trying to
absolutely.
do things like, well, this is easy to get on this continent, but not this other continent.
And I'll say up front, I mean, I don't buy things online really, certainly not food, and there were a couple ingredients that were difficult to try, like the grape leaves. I was like, okay, I got to go over to the Turkish market, and
I don't know where I get grape leaves. I know where I'd get domades. That's at my local bodega.
Right. Yeah. Well, the supermarket has them in a can for sure, but to actually make them and get the leaves alone.
Oh, they'll make it. They have like in their little deli.
Nice.
Yeah. But the baklava also.
Well, baklava, I mean, The challenge also was to try and make these accessible to as many people as possible. So I'll also mention that my frame character for this book is slowly taking shape as sort of a pisky Anthony Bourdain is the way that I'm characterizing him. So.
On the cultural recognition, I had a great deal of excitement today. I think now one of my favorite recipes to have learned about was the origin of corned beef and cabbage, which is in there for one of the Chlorocorn entries.
Mhm.
And I, completely unrelated through other happenstance, came across someone saying that actually corned beef and cabbage is not originally Irish. It's truly an Irish American dish influenced by Jewish immigrants in the US as well. And was going, hang on, what? I've written this whole frame thing where taking the mick out of myself in the process, I might add, had the voice character berating Burley for getting up in arms about Irish Americans just being Americans, and turns out it actually is an Irish American dish and not originally well, has Irish roots.
The cabbage bit seems
The cabbage bits
not
is
exclusively Irish. But
look it up. There's a very interesting Smithsonian magazine article about the development of corned beef and cabbage. This is something I just love about food, and kind of makes me all wistful for the culinary dream, is that it's such a grounds for sharing. That sounded anticlimactic, but food is a human universal, one of the few human universals, and there's something about sharing recipes and dishes. I don't think anyone can be angry on a full stomach, and it becomes this joy to share most of the time. And I don't know, that was sort of something that inspired Burley in the first place in the earliest days of the character, like making that frame character, was this the way food brings people together, the way we can cross cultural boundaries with it.
Yeah.
It is for so many people their primary or only point of contact for a lot of cultures. So
When you think of national dishes or whatever, you're like, or dishes you associate with a place, and you're like, well, a few hundred years ago they didn't have access to that key ingredient.
Nope.
Josh, have you ever had pudding chômeur?
No.
It's my favorite Canadian dish. I don't know.
Is it like Quebecois?
Yeah. So literally it means unemployed pudding, but it's
Okay.
all right. So follow along with me. You take a saucepan, or at least this is the way that I was shown to make it. Take a saucepan.
Yep.
Melt a stick and a half of butter, a cup and a half of brown sugar, a cup and a half of maple syrup, and a cup and a half of heavy cream. You get this pan full of hot caramel going. On the side, you make a cake batter and pour it into a pan, and then you just pour the caramel all over it so it soaks through, and bake it. Serve it with some ice cream on top. So good.
I've had something like that without the maple syrup.
I think that's unacceptable. Maple syrup is compulsory in all situations.
Yeah.
I just assume that in Canada you eat maple syrup on literally everything.
No, actually,
I would if I lived in Canada.
The thing that Canadians are actually nuts for as an ingredient, but we produce a lot of it, but we don't export a lot of it, is blueberries.
Okay.
A lot of blueberry stuff all around.
And there is a blueberry Canadian recipe in this cookbook.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that and bacon, but that's...
Yeah.
But not Canadian bacon. Canadian bacon cannot be found in Canada. And if before you mention us Canadians, you're thinking of back bacon, it's not the same thing.
No. As a Brit, I will agree with that.
Or pea meal bacon, we might.
Well, as a non-pork eater, I did not include any bacon recipes in this, but on my side at least. There's also a couple other little bits and bobs, like the additional kits. I think, are we putting treasures in? I can't remember.
I don't think so. I think the only addition we've added is a new Chimera and a new Kith, because I can't be involved in any book that doesn't add a new Kith to the game.
Yeah. I don't know. Let's give it a week and see if we come up with anything else to throw in, because why not?
I mean, I still have the outline for Blake Burley's Tomb of Culinary Wonders with all sorts of things in it that could be pulled out, but the book will. This is how books get bigger.
The art of cooking. No.
Yeah. Additional seasoning required.
I mean, I have long wanted to publish rules, playable rules for making fairy food. which would be based. I mean, they'd basically be the rules for potion craft in the Roots of Legend book. He says, making a shameless plug. In fact, I think there's actually some food recipes in there now that I think about them. But think about it for fairy food. So
yeah.
Just making me go why I use the second edition enchantment rules.
Exactly.
It can be
Yeah.
very easily a fairy rule food that way.
I think that was on the outline at some point, like food as token enchantment, but I don't know.
There's a lot that could go in there. It's Pandora's box, Pandora's chocolate box. Ooh, that could be a treasure.
Oh.
Yeah, if you do it a cookbook, you want most of the book to be a cookbook.
Yes, that's true.
Like here's your adventure guide for your based on like your adventure story.
Well, so speaking of recipes we didn't include, let's talk about swans.
Yeah.
Not allowed to eat swans over here. It's illegal. They all belong to the king.
To quote David Mitchell, they break your arm and then the queen eats them. Anyway, so yes, Kithbook Swan Maiden.
So
how did this happen?
This is what happens when I binge a whole bunch of Changeling the podcast to try and catch up on episodes after a very busy Christmas season of catering, and then suddenly have long air flights to Mexico and spend entirely too long thinking and grumbling about a kith that was not very well, perhaps would be difficult to insert into a game in its original form.
Yeah.
And after listening to your episode on the Player's Guide, where they came up, I was just going, I think it was on a bus, my commute to work, thinking, where even do Swan Maidens come from? Are they actually a thing in folklore? And Google is a rabbit hole. And I went down that rabbit hole and then became very irritated that they hadn't included more of the folklore into the kith. Started feverishly scribbling an outline, because that's how all these things begin. And before I knew it, I had most of half of a book written and went, oh no, now I have to finish this.
Wah, wah.
Oh. And so now here we are, and I thought I'd try to get it done for Valentine's Day, which seemed appropriate. I don't think it's going to be quite done for Valentine's Day, but maybe if I can get it done for just after. There it is, the Swan Maidens.
So what was your ideas on... I mean, there's the standard Kithbook things that you've done. Take a look at the draft you have here. But what were in terms of the guiding things you were thinking about, both for the changes and expanding for this?
So one of the big things I wanted to do was incorporate more of the folklore. That's usually where I try to start when I'm writing a kith. And I was surprised because just how much of the old folklore I didn't realize Swan Maiden was actually an archetype within the folkloric academic world, and that archetype includes things like Valkyries of all things. There's quite a number of Valkyries in Norse mythology that turn into swans and fulfill the archetype. There's also a lot of things that contradict the write-up in the Player's Guide, such as, I get why they might have wanted to say that they were all... I think it actually says in the write-up that most Swan Maidens are supposed to be asexual, which, I mean, fair enough. There's no reason they couldn't be asexual. But it seemed odd to me, an odd choice, to say that all of them are like that, when they're meant to be a kith about love and romance, ostensibly. And that actually was then another thing that I wanted to slightly refute, was that if they're a kith about love, making them only about romantic love is actually a bit reductive. And that got me into reading things like the Four Loves, which are like the four Greek, although there were a few more than just four, but the major four Greek ideas of love. And then there were things like chivalric love. And yes, the can of worms was open. And so wanted to expand that dream a bit, and also make them a bit more playable within a campaign.
Yeah. Particularly, you've revised their birth rates and frailties, which is probably sensible.
I think that's where I started, actually, was how does one make this able to fit in a group? Yeah. So they no longer kill anyone they fall in love with.
Oh, good. Did you find... I don't know if it was difficult or just kind of interesting, but because you mentioned Valkyries, and I can visualize, they had the winged helmets and everything and sort of the representations, but Is there a distinction that you've seen in the folklore between the trope of the Swan Maiden and just the general Bird Maiden? Because I know that's also a thing.
Yeah, most of the trope of the Swan Maiden is like particularly it's a slightly wider umbrella that doesn't quite go all the way to Bird Maiden, but perhaps is like aquatic Bird Maiden, waterfowl Maiden.
All right.
Actually, yeah, my favorite stories from that I found within the sort of Swan Maiden archetype had people turning into ducks instead of swans.
I was just about to ask.
There's a couple turning into geese, which actually I think is terrifying. And I think the two things that seem to define a Swan Maiden within the folklore seems to be that it's a person that at some point turns into a waterfowl, and there is always a theme of love, usually love overcoming
disastrous transformation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, a lot of the Valkyries turn into swans without it's something they have control over. So it's not always a curse that turns them into it. But there does tend to be a theme of sort of love, the symbolic, like swans being white generally then get associated with the European ideas of purity and sort of overcoming evil and stuff within the story. So there is a through line of love. I think one of my, to get back to the two sort of favorite ones I'd had, there's the 7 or the 6 swans or the 7 swans or the dozen swans, depending on which version of the story you read, which is, we'll go with 6 princes are turned into swans by, I think it's an evil stepmother, whole other archetype, we won't go into that one, and their sister, out of an act of devoted love, spends 6 years sewing shirts made out of leaves, in some versions stinging nettles specifically, and during that whole time she's not allowed to make any sound or say any word, and she goes through all the pain and the trial of those 6 years sewing these shirts, and at the end of it the shirts then are able to turn the brothers back into their human form.
Just for any high fantasy fans, the novel Daughter of the Forest by Juliette Marillier, I think is her last name, is a novel-length retelling of that story, which then kicks off an entire series, and it's a really thorough treatment of kind of ancient Irish fantasy, I guess. So I do highly recommend it.
I'll have to pick that one up.
Yeah.
There's another one where a wife of a king gets turned into a duck, and she's missing for a year. Yeah, and it sounds decidedly less romantic. But then she sort of, the duck stays near the palace. I forget how she gets turned into a duck, but her children and her husband desperately miss her, and then eventually the king, I think he's out shooting and he's about to shoot the duck, but then because of true love recognizes that the duck is his wife. I'm not quite sure how that works, but recognizes it's his wife, and because of true love that turns her back into her human form. So again, you get the sort of theme of a transformation into a waterfowl and love overcoming the problem. But in that one, she's married, already has true love, and has kids, so that sort of goes against a lot of the write-up in the player's guide. So one of the big things that I tried to move away from was to try and separate them a bit more from satyrs. Is, you'll notice I don't talk much about sexual love in the book, because it just isn't really relevant. Like, I'm sure it's there. It's definitely there with Eros type love, but it's not what the swans are about. Yeah.
And especially when you combine that with the sort of, there's the actual artistic trope of like the swan necks forming the heart. They're like, it's, they form couples for life, but they're always kind of put forward as this symbol of like the pure, chaste, marital, romantic, like all of that sort of side of things.
It's a bit weird because, even within sort of the traditional marriage stuff, if we want to talk about the sort of the medieval tropes, like, even then, a marriage isn't supposed to be chaste. That sort of defeats the purpose.
The swans have pushed the nest together for the evening or something.
Yeah.
But to your point about there being the 4 loves and the different kinds of loves, because one of the mythemes that I always point to when it comes to swans is the children of Lir, and that's very much a sibling love kind of take on it, I would say. Similar to the 6 swans as well.
Yeah.
Probably related in the original lore sources. But
And I tried to go into some of those very briefly in chapter 2.
yeah,
Talk about the four. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, but storge, which is meant to be the familial love, or storge. I don't know. I found all sorts of different storge. Philia, which is the sort of friendship love of through familiarity, which I think through the book ends up actually being tacked onto the Valkyrie idea quite a bit, and sort of sisters in arms type love. Obviously, Eros, the romantic love, is still in there, and agape, the sort of unconditional. It's meant to be sort of a higher divine love. Through a lot of the stories, he says, dancing around the subject of religion.
I mean, that's where I first learned that word. So
Yep, it's the
theology class.
Yep, it is the type of love that is used to describe the Christian God's love for humanity. Is agape.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
I first heard about it from Plato. So
Yeah.
that's
Oh yeah.
It's the Greek in the New Testament. I actually, continuing the tradition of having quotes at the start of each chapter, I did actually include a Bible verse at the start of chapter 2, just because I thought it was novel to have in a Changeling book. But it's that famous 1 Corinthians chapter 13 about this is love. So yeah, that's...
I'm sure Ecclesiastes found its way in at some point. But,
tempting. It's one of my favorite books. But yeah, agape definitely needed to be talked about because I needed to include courtly love, which I was really interested to learn about sort of the theories behind what courtly love was supposed to be, because I always just sort of think of it as like period dramas type stuff, and sort of courtly intrigue, love triangle nonsense. It turned out it's actually a bit more interesting than that. Courtly love is this weird mashup, kind of getting back to cultural cross-pollination stuff, from when Christian knights were coming back to Europe from the Crusades, having picked up a whole bunch of Islamic philosophies in the Middle East, and then getting back to Europe and sort of the court world, and then combining that with Roman and Greek philosophy, and developing this sort of concept of simply the state of being in love with someone and loving someone was the thing to be sort of sought after, but not necessarily meant to be acted upon, because many of the people that, at the time marriages were usually done more, or certainly amongst the higher classes, were more a political thing than they were out of love.
Mm-hmm.
So very often, if these knights were falling in love with someone, it was with a woman that was already married. And of course, they were not supposed to do anything about that at that point. So you get this weird sort of idolizing, or taking simply the pining after someone else, and simply the act of being in that romantic love, but also trying to uphold the sort of agape, selfless, chaste love at the same time. And apparently, this was where the original stories of Lancelot and Guinevere got tacked onto Arthurian legend. Lancelot, apparently, I haven't checked all these sources yet, but I'm really wanting to now. Apparently, Lancelot, when he first was created in the mythos, was meant to be a chivalric, courtly love character, and the fact that he was in love with Guinevere but never acted upon it was meant to be the point of his character. Obviously, that didn't last, and often, I suspect, in cases of courtly love, that sort of the ideal and the reality were not necessarily the same thing. But it is a really fascinating bit of history, and particularly given that changelings have that kind of obsession with courtly, vaguely medieval life. Yeah, I thought it was quite an interesting aspect.
Yeah. And when you look at the origins of those stories and like the Eleanor of Aquitaine court of love period, and that, I mean, so much of the art that was produced out of High Middle Ages France in particular was like of that vibe, like all the troubadour songs. And it's interesting you talk about the returning from the Crusades piece, because I also imagine you had the influence of Al-Andalus to the south, which also kind of, some of those stories probably percolated north from there. So all of that kind of conjoined onto, I guess, the Celtic substrate or the British substrate, because you had like Tristan and Isolde and all of that.
Mm.
Yeah. All that being said, it is interesting. I mean, the exercise of Changeling in particular, I think, is to take some of that folklore and do a postmodern, maybe not postmodern, modernist at least, adaptation of it. So it's like you have this Swan Maiden who's born as a human, who's living as a modern human, and then when they go through their chrysalis, maybe they were really into the story of Lancelot and Guinevere. Maybe they had inclinations that they weren't sure where they came from. But then to awaken and discover that your heritage is this series of lifetimes that kind of embody this ideal, which to many people, maybe the changeling themselves included, is quite antiquated and sort of like, didn't we give this up when people stopped tying ribbons around the jousting lance and doing all those other sort of phallic sublimations of whatever.
Gotta get that courtly love out
exploring, yeah, heaving bosoms. So the exploration of that psychology, I think, is something, like you're saying, the presentation in the player's guide only scratches the surface of where you could get into this. I know that I think in psychology there's the idea of the Lancelot complex as like a syndrome, maybe, I don't know, of that idea taken too far. You become obsessed with like protecting women and all of that. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of directions you can go with it, and I think that what you've done in this book, at least, is given more of a foundation, more angles to it for players to potentially build on, which makes it a more, I guess, with more possibilities. And that is just as important to making them playable as toning down the ridiculous birthrights and frailties.
Oh gosh. Turns out, as we get further into the book, that a good amount of those birthrights and frailties could easily just be carved off and made into merits and flaws.
Which you also provide, so huzzah.
Which I do provide. Yeah, in chapter 2, after briefly talking about a couple different types of love, I tried to think through different ways that a Swan Maiden, the way you might build love into, or like their loving relationship into their character, since that's supposed to be quite an important thing for them. Yeah, so again, the goal was to try and make them playable.
And you did not include romantic legacies, but I will forgive you for that.
I mean, if someone wants to add those in for a courtly romance supplement, then I think that sure, why not?
But, again, we have 3 weeks left in February. I'm just saying, there's time.
I will revisit the idea. But something I did re-include was the Gancona.
Yes.
I think one of the trickiest parts with this book was going, well, this is the world of darkness. There's a point that one needs to touch on the darker side, but the darker side of relationships gets very dark very quickly. So I did want to include the Gancona, particularly because the more I thought about the Swan Maidens, the more the Gancona seemed like the perfect Thalane counterpart to them. Although I did realize I'd forgotten that I'd never clocked that they were a chimera, not a Thalane. Now they're a Thalane because it made more sense, I thought.
Yeah.
So the Gancona are now in there as a Thalane. They're unpleasant.
Yeah.
But they're meant to be unpleasant. I think in recent months, Josh has convinced me through the Discord discussions that some of the Thalane do in fact deserve to be made into playable Kith, if you want to call them that. I'd say the Gancona are not one of those Thalane.
Yeah, they're with the nasties on that one where...
But you provide a big old trigger warning at the front of the book.
Yes.
So that's, I think, reasonable.
There is no chapter 1 splash page. There is instead a large trigger warning, because otherwise I was going to have to put them all throughout the book, and it just got a bit tiresome, I thought. So, yeah, the Gancona are in there. Please be aware. It touches on... They are predators. Like, that is what they are.
I have a question about the Gancona. Was their frailty inspired at all by Exalted the Fair Folk? I don't know if you even read it, but...
I can honestly say it's not, because I haven't played Exalted the Fair Folk. There's a mention in their book, in their original entry in Nobles the Shining Host. There's something about their heart being sort of separate, and then I needed a new vulnerability for them, and I thought sort of a phylactery type thing was quite fitting. And then I remembered a short play short story and which one was it? A short story I'd read, and I keep wanting to say that it was Edgar Allan Poe, but it wasn't Edgar Allan Poe. That's the Telltale Heart. Oh, I know.
Mhm.
Not nearly as classically oriented. It was in the Harry Potter spin-off, Tales of Beedle the Bard.
Oh.
The hairy heart was what had given me the idea of they have this sort of phylactery heart that's separate from themselves, but it's all sort of dry and shriveled and black and nasty.
Ew.
Because they are heartless, literally heartless.
Yeah.
But it also gives them a nice sweetness. I think they make really good villains if you have a playing table that,
Mhm.
and potentially quite cathartic villains and counterpoints.
Yeah, and I liked your bit also earlier. Sorry, we were talking the Swan Maidens, but it also applies to This just makes me go. We need a Changeling way versus Arcadian template, like a way of being like, here's your kith, and they go through the Changeling way ritual. Here's a kith, and they possessed somebody, and the Genkaner does it a little bit differently.
Yeah,
because you mentioned something about the Swan Maidens coming back. Some of them went with the She and come back with them and stuff, and it's like, yeah, that's a thing I keep musing around how you'd want to do that.
yeah.
As a,
Well, that came from when I actually sat down and reread after years the Gang Connor. Like I'd remembered the Gang Connor and went back and reread their entry and realized that they're a chimera that possesses people. That's unnerving. So instead of being reborn, sort of the Changeling way, they literally devour their target's mind and then possess that body. I have to say, when I started reading that Chimera again, was suddenly going, is this why they're in the Nobles the Shining Hopes book? Is this what happens to Arcadian She after when they don't reincarnate? Like, it opens some very interesting questions.
That whole book has some interesting questions, to be honest. There's other parts of that book that are, you know.
No, but that's a neat idea.
Yeah.
Or that could be one thing that happens to the Arcadian She.
Yeah. In a number of ways, this is actually things that maybe Nobles the Shining Host should have done that you're doing in this book.
Yeah.
Like also the love section and stuff. I think it works better than their romantic legacies and stuff. So,
Still 3 weeks. Still time to redeem them.
Yeah, we'll see.
Well, anyway.
So we have some famous Swan Maidens.
Treasures, merits. The treasures are fun. I like the Shirt of Nettles in particular.
I love a good treasure.
Yeah.
Can't have a book without treasure.
The way you're doing oaths, I'm like, I haven't seen that approach before, and I'm not even know what I think about it. It's not a criticism or anything. I've just read it and I'm like, I have to think about this more.
Had you done this before? Because it looks familiar.
Not exactly. So this came about because I was trying to make treasures, and a lot of treasures related to love started. I was looking at them going, this doesn't work as a treasure because it's not about the object. It's about the power of love and the promise between them. And then I was going, oh, well, maybe there's something in there that can work with oaths or the art of the contract art. And then suddenly there's so many like little corners of Changeling that I haven't read enough of. And went and reread Oaths, and I had completely missed that Oaths could have enchantments on top of them.
With Contract 5.
Yeah. And thought, hang on, why is this not a bigger thing? This is fascinating. So
because who in their right mind would take Contract 5?
I mean, now I almost want to, and I think I actually made one of the NPCs that's like a Swan Maiden that specializes in doing like changing marriages, basically, for that very purpose.
Hey, I made a pretty intimidating Bogart NPC once with Contracts 5. So,
but see, these are NPCs. That makes sense.
Yeah. Well, that was why some of the treasures did kind of emulate the .5. It was the binding cord lets you basically get to Contract 5 without having to have Contract 5.
Good call.
It was a cheeky workaround. But yeah, I went and I thought, I mean, some of the sample oaths just seem much like the Swan Maidens in the original form, a bit unplayable. And so I wanted to I started riffing a lot on the sort of the four or five different loves that we talk about in chapter 2. And so then ended up going, well, what if we have some oaths that relate to each of those loves? Oaths of love are probably some of the oldest oaths ever sworn. And so, yeah, there's a whole section of new oaths or sort of adapted oaths and some new enchantments that can go with them.
Nice.
including Fairy Godparent, because I was annoyed that there wasn't one of those already.
I think there's one in like Fool's Luck Way of the Comet, like somewhere buried in the past. There's, or maybe in the Enchanted Book, but yeah.
I think there's a merit that kind of alludes to it.
That's what I mean.
yeah.
Yeah.
It was one of those things that I was just sort of going, why is this not a thing already? Surely it's somewhere. Not really.
I know.
And also the last one ended up becoming a way that someone could end up becoming a Dauntain as well by complete accident.
Wah, wah.
Yeah, that was. I wasn't expecting that to happen, but the vow of abstinence ended up taking up an entire page.
Yeah, I was getting Dauntain vibe off that one's.
Which was not my intent. The potential bad outcome of everything being broken was become a Dauntain. Although not in the way a lot of people might be thinking. Go and read it. Don't just make assumptions.
I was going to say, is this how you get incels? Anyway.
Yeah, anyway. And then merits and flaws, a lot of which were carved out of the original Birthrights and Frailties.
Mm-hmm.
And I was excited to stick in the pictures of the Puka and Redcap in love.
Right.
I was so excited when I came across them in one of the vault packs of artwork and was like, oh, they have to be in there!
Yes.
Merits and flaws, they've got not just for Swan Maidens, ones that other people can use as well, like Brand of the Traitor.
Well, and there had to be an ugly duckling one. Like, it was just necessary.
Yeah. I'm almost like it's almost an advantage, like the joy of getting to play a Goose Maiden instead of a Swan Maiden.
Careful with the male duck maidens. That's almost getting Gunner territory.
If you don't take any dots in title, then you're an untitled Goose Maiden.
A Gander Maiden? There is actually a Goose man rather than maiden in the NPC section. Michael Gander listed as Father Goose.
Nice.
I'm surprised no one has commented on some of the NPCs because particularly Sarah Avery. I've realized Swan Maidens are the perfect kith to play a magical girl.
I forget, in one of the conversations that we had with the authors, I feel like they came up, and I don't know that was the motivation for creating them, but I sort of feel like it also was. I don't remember.
It fits really well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like you think of kind of, particularly when you see that they have that sort of Valkyrie background as well in the folklore, you think, what's a feminine fighter trope that does things in the name of love? And instantly an image of Sailor Moon pops into your head.
Yes. Just you two started playing in my head when you said that.
although there are other kits for like when you do a team up, but yes, like definitely the main character or if there's only one character.
But then you think about some of the other magical girl stuff like Madoka Magica that's come out, and you sort of go, ooh, we've just cycled back to the tragic Swan Maiden.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a couple NPCs that sort of reference that.
You also did a lovely pink border, which I think is excellent.
It's so
it's a beautiful book. Even the version we have right now is so beautiful.
This is I am kicking around the idea. I do think all the C30 titles should have different sort of color templates to the borders, but
definitely
to be determined.
I have now reverse engineered the templates enough that if you need that done, my services are available.
Right on.
Oh my days, some of the template ones that you download from the vault are there's a lot going on there, and figuring out what button to press to get it to do what you want is it's a lot.
You get the hang of it eventually.
Oh yeah.
My knocker brain's going very mad at those templates though. So yes, do you have any? I mean, so we've already talked about 2 projects you're working on.
Right.
Is there anything else in your back?
Well, I mean, let me just get the list out. Let's see. I'm very excited to be helping as second and third fiddle on a couple other c30 projects. I don't know if I'm allowed to say them, but there are some really exciting ones in the works that...
I mean, you can say them, and then if we decide you can't later, they can always be cut.
Great. Well, I'm helping with Fifes of Bright Paradise setting book for Changeling in the Caribbean. I'm getting to write pirate stuff for that, which is very fun.
Yarr.
and finally got me going again with Kingdom of the Feathered Serpent, which I am determined to finish by the end of 2025, particularly off the back of visiting Changeling player friends in Mexico. Shout out to Luis.
Yeah.
Was very excited. Visited him, and he took me to visit the Mexica ruins at Teotihuacan.
Nice.
And then took me to a cave where I ate crickets.
Yay!
So I'm very excited to try and get the first volume of Kingdom of the Feathered Serpent out. There's always, of course, Blake Burley's Tome of Culinary Wonders. I need to get that right. Burley's not dead.
I mean, Tomb works really well too.
It may be where I end up by the time I finish these projects, which will hopefully have the Secrets of Fairy Food and the Culinary Dream. And then dabbling in the background of other C30 projects, the Anonymous book, hopefully.
One step at a time.
Some stuff. Yeah. One step at a time. I'm here. I'm available to help. If you want to make a Changeling Vault book, I'm always excited to help, even if it's just making glass icons, because I love doing those.
Huzzah!
Yeah. Okay.
As for us,
you can reach us discord.me/CTP, where occasionally I've seen Andrew hanging out too. You can send us an email, podcast@changelingthepodcast.com. You can go to our website, changelingthepodcast.com, leave a comment there or view or listen there. You can also listen and comment on our YouTube channel for Changeling the Podcast. You can also toot on Mastodon, changelingpod@dice.camp, and of course our Patreon, if you want to follow us for free or give us some money, Changeling the Podcast there.
Links to all of which will be in the show notes to this episode.
And once again, I'm Josh.
I remain the Socié known as Puka.
And a warning, if among your group of friends there's bad relationships that just sort of go in a line and then somebody disappears each time, there might be a Ganconner among your friend group.
I was just going to say, Bon appetit! While the Changeling Cookbook as a supplement is firmly grounded in the foods of the autumn world, Burley and Teague are hard at work on a second volume to discuss some of the chimerical delicacies which one might only obtain in the wilds and grocery stores of the Dreaming. The average boggin butcher in the fields behind charges 3 guilders for half a pound of fresh-sliced manticore, but 2 more to have it properly brined so as to dissolve the venom. Way stations along the Silver Path offer shots of moonlight-tinged dew that are excellent for flavoring airy desserts. And what self-respecting foodie could pay a visit to the war-torn plain of Kuraksara without gathering a few winter squash watered with Fomorian blood, from whose flesh crawls nightmares? The realm of Fey cookery, though not a capital R realm, is nevertheless one of ever-expanding complexity and wonder, the exploration of which we here at Changeling the Podcast hope to keep supporting. Speaking of support, you can lend us some at www.patreon.com/changelingthepodcast, and thereby join the ranks of our esteemed patrons who include Derek, Dorcadus, Elris, Yebel, Jason Vines, Oreo, Ross Caboose, Sanchiger, Sija, Simon Strand, and Victor Torre. We also appreciate reviews on the podcast listening platform of your greatest convenience, and you can reach us on Discord at www.discord.me/CTP to share food-related adventures and anecdotes of your own. There's always room for one more at our freeholds table, so do stop by when you can. All that remains is to wish you bon appetit, and to remind you to keep on dreaming.